Mark Blyth is a name that keeps cropping up. In case you don't know, Mark Blyth, link below, is a professor of political economy at Brown University who made somewhat of a name for himself by predicting the result of the Brexit referendum and the election of Donald Trump. I would recommend his video, Global Trumpism, link below. However, I find myself in almost total disagreement with his analysis, particularly in his description of the SNP as a left-wing party, since the SNP are a party whose appeal relies almost entirely upon their anti-Englishness, combined with a touch of Alex Jones's use of film as a replacement for history, i.e. Braveheart, and that other one with Liam Neeson. I realise that it is popular these days to conflate the Trump victory and Brexit, and in some quarters to go further and link in Marine Le Pen, the Austrian elections, Geert Wilders and various other political movements as if they are all part of the same thing. And those that do so also tend to project upon them the octopus tentacles of globalism. This generates the counter-argument espoused in part by Mr. Blyth of racism, sexism, nationalism, etc., along with a lament for the centre of politics. What neither of these two sides acknowledge is that to equate Trump and Brexit, and indeed the other political movements, is to accept the notion of the American empire. It is also debatable if Trumpism is a thing, but for the sake of argument, let's assume that it is. But let us stop for a moment and think. If we take Mr. Blyth's thesis that economics defined the Brexit result, why do these economic factors only appear to have an influence in England and Wales? Scotland and Northern Ireland face exactly the same economic pressures, perhaps worse if the level of government funding is an indication of deprivation. Mr. Blyth in his lecture explains this as the result of right-wing populism in the form of UKIP. The problem with this argument is twofold. Firstly, it completely ignores that Brexit is also Legxit. The second problem is that UKIP is not a right-wing party. It has been portrayed as such by Labour and elements of the left-wing press to try and scare the voters, but that doesn't make it right-wing, any more than the GMB is a right-wing union because of the dispute at the Lindsey oil refinery in 2009, link below, or the cotton workers of Darwin when put out of work by Gandhi in the 1930s, link below. The failure of the pro-EU campaign was simply that rather than offer a positive message, they decided to call everyone names and make wild claims of economic collapse. Perhaps this can be ascribed to the inability of government to influence events, as Mr. Blyth suggests in his presentation, or it could just be that politics has become so corrupt and downgraded, along with most institutions of the state, including academia, that they are paralysed by their own groupthink. But regardless, the pro-EU campaign failed because it made no sense. I remember seeing the opening salvos of the American election campaign, with the Democrats playing exactly the same cards as had failed in Brexit/Legxit, and knew Trump would win. Globalism does have a part to play in this, in the form of what might be called the global class, the type of person who describes themselves as a citizen of the world, and they work in a homogenized culture disconnected from the reality of the people in whichever country they happen to be living in at the time. They are also the sort of person who prefers to read a sociological research paper on the opinions of their chambermaid rather than talking to the actual chambermaid. Yet none of this is new. To hear some people talk, you'd think that globalism, like history, has only been around since the invention of the internet. People choose to ignore things like oranges, rabbits, and the bubonic plague, or indeed populist movements like the Peasants' Revolt, linked below. The Peasants' Revolt is a rather useful pointer because the indicators Mr. Blyth did not show in his presentation was the level of taxation and the level of corruption. I'm not just talking about direct taxation, the sort of thing that would turn up in the statistics of a political economist. I'm talking about this sort of thing, linked below. Though the main point Mr. Blyth completely misses is that times change. I would suggest going to look at the various convictions of Brigitte Bardot for inciting racial hatred. What 10 years ago was considered criminalised speech in the wake of some 100 terrorist killings in France in the past year, well, it's now become the common currency of all sides in the political debate. It is this that is driving the support for Marine Le Pen more than some arcane discussion of the euro or economics. No doubt Mr. Blyth would say this is an indication of the underlying racism, being as he is in the isolated, homogenized world of academia. His problem is that by taking this stance, he is hollowing out the centre that he no doubt claims to represent, and willfully ignoring the castrations that may or may not have occurred at the Bataclan, linked below. Because the truth is, people will put up with being lied to. They will put up with being poor. They will put up with being spied upon. But what they will not put up with is not being protected, especially when they are being told to shut up at the same time.